Thank you very much. Let me get my slides rolling here, which I could do if this giant thing wasn't. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about hemlock trees and why they're so important. Hemlocks are a very common tree in New York. 10 years ago when I started giving this presentation, I'd say they were the third most common tree in New York, and they aren't anymore. They're a foundation species, which means that they create the ecosystem that other species depend on to live. They fill a pretty unique ecosystem niche in our area. They're a very shade-adapted hemlock. They're a very shade-adapted conifer, which is unusual. And so they tend to grow in our valleys and ravines. They prefer fairly wet habitats, although they are not forced to grow only in wet habitats. And they can photosynthesize with very small amounts of light, which is why they do better in those shady places. They support over 400 species, birds, mammals, arthropods. There are more spiders in hemlock forests than there are in the surrounding forests, more different kinds of spiders. They're also called the ever-feeding tree. As the snow falls in the wintertime, if the droopy branches of the hemlock get pulled down so that animals on the ground can continue to feed on those branches through the winter. They also provide a unique habitat for aquatic ecosystems. They keep snow on the ground later into the spring than other kinds of forest around them, and so they provide cold water recharge into streams, helping keep the streams cooler. They also provide direct shade over streams, very dense shade, which helps to keep streams cool, which is important in places like the Adirondacks where you have great cold water fish habitat, like trout habitat. So they help keep the freshwater streams cold and clean, which is important. And they're facing a challenge across the East Coast. And this is what forests are looking like these days in Pisgah National Forest, down in the Appalachian region. This is what we'd like to avoid here. This is the pest that's causing that damage, Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. We're here to talk about today. There are hemlocks in many regions of the world. Here they all are. And there are HWA in a lot of those places. HWA is native to these areas in Asia, and it moved over into the Western United States many, many, many thousand years ago and functions as a native there. It's just us over here on the East Coast in the heavily glaciated region where our hemlocks have not had any kind of exposure to this kind of predator before. So HWA arrived in New York in the 1980s and moved through the lower Hudson and then into the Finger Lakes region and started moving through the Catskills. This is the early teens here. And now it's all the way up into the Lake George watershed and moving into the Tug Hill area as well, along the lake plain. This is what it looks like in the Adirondack area right now. All of the red dots are HWA. So you can see it's gotten pretty common in the Lake George watershed, but we're not seeing it outside the watershed yet, except for right along the edge of the APIP prison boundary. There's a closer in look at the Lake George watershed. Some of the newer finds are right up in this area where we hadn't seen it until just in the last few weeks. I must be going the wrong way here. There we go. And here's every place that we've looked in the last 18 months or so. So there's been a lot of search activity in the Adirondacks, but we keep finding new stuff all the time. So it's really critical to have lots of boots on the ground looking for this pest so we understand how it's spreading in the Adirondacks. So HWA looks like this white woolly mass that grows on the twig at the base of the needles. This is where it likes to land, right there. And this is what they look like if you strip the wool away and magnify greatly the insect underneath. The little pores up here on its plates is where it makes its wool. And then this long, child, silly straw looking thing is actually its mouth parts that it sticks down into the twig of the hemlock. And the HWA pulls starches out of the hemlock twig that the tree made for its own use. And it's not actually the feeding that kills the hemlocks. Our understanding is that the hemlocks busily wall off each one of those little wounds that the HWA make. If you have one or two, HWA, it's not a big deal. But if you have a dense infestation, like you saw in the previous slide, it makes it so that the twig itself gets damaged, and then the plant can't get sap out to the end of the twig to make new tissue and new needles. And then when the old needles eventually stop working and fall off, then the plant starves. And we're pretty sure that's what actually kills the trees. HWA, the mortality due to HWA is very, very high, and it usually takes between 4 years to about 20 years for a tree to die. And how long it takes depends on how many cold winters you have in that window. Down in the south, it's more like 4 to 10 years to mortality from infestation to tree mortality. Up in the northern parts of New York, it can be quite a long time, more on the 20-year range, but we have more winters like we have the last couple of winters, maybe not. HWA is 2 generations a year. They lay their overwintering eggs in the early summer. And then they grow into adulthood and that overwintering generation lays their eggs in the spring, in late March, early April. And then the spring generation grows very quickly, and then they lay those early summer eggs that start the cycle over again. When they first hatch, they look like this rather cute little thing, which is called a crawler. You can see it doesn't have much in the way of legs, but it's very, very small. So they don't move around well by themselves, but they can be blown on wind. They can crawl onto the feet of birds, we believe, and get moved around that way. This is the only stage in which HWA can move from one location to another. So the crawlers hatch, they go find a suitable place to settle down, they put their mouth parts into a tree, and that is it. They can't move again after that. And if they are dislodged from that location, they die. In the summertime, that overwintering generation, once it settles, it looks like this, and then it just hangs out over the summer in an inactive state called estivation. It's like hibernation, what happens in the summer. And then in the fall, they wake up and start putting on wool. This is what they look like over the summer. They're very small and hard to see, which is why we tend to suggest people survey in the winter. Because this is what they look like in the winter. Once they put on that wool that we believe they use to protect themselves from weather and predators, and they also lay their eggs in that wool. Once that wool is produced, they're a lot easier to see. This is what it looks like from about November to June. Each adelgid lays between 50 and 100 eggs. So you've got, you know what, I'm just going to skip this slide. I just told you all that. So the issue is they reproduce asexually. They're all females on this side of the continent. And so any individual can start a new infestation. They have 2 generations per year, so they have 2 opportunities for exponential growth. And there are no native HWA predators, so they're not getting a lot of pressure on that population from being eaten. So we have uncontrolled growth that causes this kind of population, and that is what's killing our trees. Once HWA has arrived, there are short-term and long-term management options. Short-term, we're really looking at chemical treatment of the HWA. In the long term, the options are biological control or lingering or developing some kind of hemlock, HWA-resistant hemlock. The two chemicals that are the most used for HWA are imidacloprid, which takes about a year to become effective, but then it lasts for between 3 to 7 years with an average of about 5. It used to be widely available, but that is changing. And as of June of this year, I believe you will need to hire somebody to apply it for you. Dinotefuran works right away within a few weeks, but it's gone in a year, and it can only be applied by applicators. There are several different application methods if you're using imidacloprid. You can apply it to the stem through basal bark application or stem injection, or you can put it in the soil around the tree through soil drench or soil injection or time-release tablets. If you want to add on the dinotefuran, that fast-acting one, then in New York, you are restricted to basal bark application because that's the only way you can apply dinotefuran in New York. So there are two long-term options. The first one I'm going to talk about is biological control, which is the meat and potatoes of our lab at the New York State Hemlock Initiative. This is a long-term solution. Once biological control is using a natural predator or pathogen to naturally control a pest. Once that biological control is established on the landscape, it's a long-term solution. You don't have to do anything further. The biological control is handling the problem for you. And it's something that works at the landscape scale, whereas there's no way we're ever going to be able to treat our entire landscape of hemlocks with chemicals. The issue is that we're all collectively still working on this solution, and it could be a while before this is really something that is on the landscape and saving trees. So if you want to save the trees you have today, chemical treatment is really your option. Here are the bugs that we work with. We work with the Laricobius beetles. The ones that we use most commonly are from the Pacific Northwest. They feed on the winter generation, that overwintering generation of HWA. We've been releasing them since 2009, and they have established at more than 17 sites in New York, and we're starting to find populations that have spread from those sites. So they're establishing really well in the warmer parts of the state. Doesn't do all that much for the Adirondacks. We are trying to release them in the Adirondacks, and we hope they will establish. Stay tuned. This is what they look like eating HWA. And these are the places where we've released them. You can see the size of the release, and you can see the stars are where they've established, and the little plus signs are where we found them where we didn't release. Silver flies are the other bug that we work with. The reason we're working with two bugs is that these guys, also from the Pacific Northwest, these feed on the spring generation, right? So you have those two opportunities for the population to rebound, and you really need a predator that hits both of those. These guys, it's actually their larvae that eat HWA, and they eat the eggs of the HWA. And we've been releasing them since 2017. Stay tuned to see if we can find establishment in New York. So this is what they look like. They're very, very small. This is a release tube in that somebody's hand. There's the larvae. This is our hero, the fly larvae, eating the HWA eggs. These are the eggs, and then this is the body of the adult HWA. And this is where we've released so far in New York. So we've been very active in the Lake George area with this predator because this one seems more well adapted to colder climates as compared to the Laricobius, which we are hoping will establish in Lake George, but stay tuned. The other long-term option is developing those resistant hemlocks that would have some sort of natural resistance to the HWA. And the Nature Conservancy is working hard on this in a project called Tree Species in Peril. And there's a smaller project that's called the Lingering Hemlock Project. Tree Species in Peril program is working on developing resistant strains of all of these different species, 3-ash, beech, and hemlock, to their predators. That would be EAB and beech bark disease and beech leaf disease, and then Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. A lingering hemlock is a hemlock that remains alive when at least 80% of the hemlocks near it have died. And so in the southern portions of Eastern Hemlocks range, they're totally, they've reached this quite some time ago, and they're actively searching for lingering hemlock now. The goal is to find any trees that have some level of tolerance to HWA and breed them together into a robustly resistant strain of HWA that we could then plant out into the landscape. Up here, we haven't reached that 80% mortality yet. And so in New York, we're working on setting up hemlock health monitoring plots so we can track hemlock mortality and see when we can start looking for lingering hemlocks. If you're interested in this, please reach out to Grace Haynes, who is my colleague, and she will help set up a training to help you understand how to do this. So once HWA has arrived, you need to figure out which trees you're going to save and how you're going to save them. So we've built a stand conservation tool that will help you walk through this. There's a Word document that you can just read that will talk about all the different factors that you might consider as you're deciding which trees to treat or which hemlocks to focus on conserving. And then if you are planning to put together some kind of grant, or you're managing a land trust and you need to deal with a lot of properties, there's an Excel spreadsheet you can use to get very quantitative about it. If you're on the leading edge of an infestation, you should probably treat. If you have old growth, please treat. And if you're going to take down the trees soon anyway, don't treat. Anything else, you can go through the tool and figure it out. You can figure out where your stands are, either by walking through your property or looking at an aerial image taken in the wintertime, and then go out and survey, score your properties, and think about which ones you're going to manage. A lot of people have questions about which treatment they should use. Should they be using imidacloprid alone, which is much less expensive than using both tools together, or should we use two tools together? The imidacloprid and the dinotefuran. And we have a tool to help you walk through that. It's just a handout, really. And we have another handout to help you think through which trees you might want to treat. There are several regional projects that have used the prioritization tool, the hemlock conservation tool, to help them secure grants to get funding to treat hemlocks across their landscape, whatever that is. It's usually a watershed. So a lot of the lake associations and watershed associations in the Finger Lakes have done this. Skinny Atlas has, and Wasco Lake has. And that what you do is you develop a regional group that can reach out to hemlock property owners, train some volunteers to survey on those properties as you get permission, and then rank the properties, and then apply for funding. And then when you apply for funding, you can say, look, we've done our homework. We know what's going on in our landscape. We know what we need. We just need you to fund it. And that's a much stronger argument than we have hemlocks and we want to save them. So here's where all the regional plant projects are across the state. That is my talk for you, and I hope I left enough time for the other presenters.
Something like that, perhaps.
Looking good. Thank you.
Nice. So thank you so much to Carolyn and Jason for everything you're doing with Hemlock Adelgid statewide and in the Adirondacks. Really appreciated learning about like the origins of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid and what we're doing on the ground. Thank you so much. I'm Ari Giller-Leinwell. I'm with APIP. I'm the Terrestrial Invasive Species Manager. And this section of the presentation is really how folks listening can help. We had a survey season with the Forest Pest Hunter program since 2020. So this webinar sort of serves as the kickoff of our 5th survey season for Hemlock Adelgid. And I'm really excited to talk through the Forest Pest Hunter program, how you can get out there and survey in general, and then how you use IMAP invasives to get that information back over to folks like Jason and I and DEC, so we can really decide where these Laricopius beetles and silverflies get released and where future treatments happen. We've seen some of these maps already, but this is all data here from Forest Pest Hunters last survey season. The green are the positive points, and then the non-detects are super important too. So this is the sort of data set that you all can add to. And it's already been an amazing effort. Thank you, everybody that's been involved with this program since 2020. This past calendar year, we crossed over 1,500 hours that folks have spent surveying on the ground, adopting over 66 trails. We'll talk through how you can adopt trails through APIP's website, but basically it's IMAP invasives that the data goes in, and then that's the central location for the entire state. Every agency is going to look at that. So when I'm referring to these maps and these numbers, it's really all IMAP invasives is that repository, is that database. So we can throw some of these links in the chat, although to be honest, if you go to adkinvasives.com, we've got a Forest Pest Hunter landing page that has, that's how you'd get to a lot of this information. But I figure, well, I've got you all here, can sort of run through what it would look like to adopt a trail, where surveys are most needed, and then how you get that information back over via IMAP invasives. So I'm going to go quickly through it, but it's super important if you're going out in the Adirondacks in the winter. You definitely want to be prepared. The 10 essentials on the right there are really non-negotiables if you're going out, especially with temperatures like they are now. If things break, you don't want to be stranded. Paying attention to the weather, we'll get into that, but I think if folks are on the East Coast, shoot, even down towards the Gulf of Mexico, I think they're pretty chilly right now. And then on the left, we've got a lot of things if you want to carry some extra weight that are never bad to have out with you. If you get stuck overnight, if you want a hot drink, traction, I think, is super important as well. In terms of survey materials for HWA in particular, don't be removing branches and taking things home. This is more like the professional crew set of tools on the right, but a hand lens and a headlamp come in incredibly important. What I tend to do is look underneath the branches and illuminate them with a headlamp, and that's really going to help hone in on those white woolly masses. And that's what you're going to be seeing this time of year. But there's some ambiguity. I'm excited to get to the slides in terms of lookalikes. The hand lens comes in super handy there to hone in on some of those details. Yeah, great weather map. So we talked about some of the gear, but a great idea to tell people where you're going, when you're planning to be back, checking in on the weather. Handy little checklist for y'all. And there's hope. This is the Catskills a couple years ago. Infestations with HWA for 5, 10 plus years now. And some of the trees are definitely still hanging on. So when you're out hiking, what are you looking for to identify a hemlock tree? Jason referred to this like furrowed reddish bark. Looks quite a bit different than, say, an oak or maple tree out in the forest, a bit like a pine. The way I differentiate there is it's going to have green, a pretty dark green needle on it right now versus our hardwoods are going to be bare. Compared to a pine tree, I find the needles of hemlock to be a darker green. So that's a good ID tip when you're out there differentiating from other conifers. The white dual needles, dual lines on the bottom of the needle is definitely an identifier. Versus a spruce, those needles are sharp. Versus hemlock are not. They'll not roll in your hand. Versus like a balsam fir might roll in your hand. These are pretty darn flat with hemlock needles. And I really appreciate both Carolyn and Jason really diving into what we're looking for. These woolly masses during the winter time are key. Something I definitely want to point out is you're looking up at that canopy and you might not always be able to access branches. So make sure you're looking at smaller trees too, and potentially anything on the ground, because a lot of times the trees are almost evolved to not have branches lower to the ground. Detailed pictures via IMAP. I'm excited to get to the IMAP section to show you how to do that. But any of these pictures, probably not getting there in the field. But if I saw an observation in IMAP that I was reviewing, these would be confirmations for sure. Another really important note, any observation is good. Detailed pictures are good. This is a quick foray into why. There's a lot of other pests that you might see that could throw you off. Shoot, some have thrown me off this season, especially these spider egg sacs. This is almost when you need the hand magnification. You don't have the woolly structure to these. They're also at a different location. Hemlock Adelgid is only going to be right on this stem versus the egg sac up on the needle. Jason mentioned Hemlock elongate scale. It's a different invasive. But again, that scale is on the needle directly versus on the stem. Generally, I've seen them both colors. This white and some brown gray color. Spittlebug foam. These are things that I feel like if you're going out and surveying a lot, you'll become quite acquainted with. But it's important to be able to differentiate and take detailed pictures is really the crux of it. So here's a fun rundown. This is what we're looking for, but other things you'll encounter. The top right, we've got our Hemlock elongate scale, our spittlebug foam. And similarly, leaf miner damage we have here. Spiders. The spider webbing is quite different than the cottony look of this Hemlock Adelgid here. So that's a quick what you're looking for in the forest, but in terms of reporting it, it's IMAP invasives. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but we've got this guide right on our website, the Forest Pest Hunter section of adkinvasives.com. But essentially, you want to go via a computer web browser and create your login to IMAP invasives and set your jurisdiction to New York. This gives you access to IMAP Invasives browser. This is the database. It's free. Most partner agencies use it, and it's citizen sciences can use it too. It's a really cool thing to mess around with when you're looking for something like Adelgid or really any invasive plant or animal in lands and forests throughout New York State. Up here, you have some filters, so you can really hone in on the maps that we've been showing you where Hemlock Adelgid is known to be. For forest pest hunters, make sure you set your project to the APIP Volunteer Forest Pest Monitoring Project. This lets us keep track of where surveys are going on, and folks like me and partners to go in and approve observations and follow up with any questions we might have. Once you set up your web browser, you can get an app on your phone. This is what you'd be using out in the field to collect your observations. Ultimately, when it's set up on your phone, this is your landing screen that you'd use when you're out hiking. This is where you want to take your detailed pictures, and you can set Hemlock Woolly Adelgid with your list. If this is something you're doing a lot of time or you want to mess around before you go out in the field, I'd recommend that. You can set a custom list, so instead of browsing through every invasive species, it's just plug and play. hit your woolly adelgid, whether you saw it or not, your detailed picture, and then you'll accrue your observations as you go. At the end of the day, once you're back within service or Wi-Fi, you can upload, you can review, make sure everything matches up, add any notes. So a lot going on here, but it's incredibly powerful, free software for online and on your phone. And we've got the tutorial on the 80K website, 80kinvasives.com. So how would I approach going out and surveying? You see a grove of hemlocks, and it's probably going to be quite hard to check every tree. So I'd sort of think how much time you're able to dedicate. Maybe if it's you can see the end of the grove, a zigzag pattern through it, checking a number of branches on each tree. This is where your hand lens helps. If you see something that might be it, your headlamp looking up at the underside of the leaves. It's a good time. I really encourage everybody to get out and do it. It's sort of this meditative process in the woods. HWA are scary, but it's good work to be doing, and I find it sort of a meditative practice. I definitely want to point out that non-detects are important too. We certainly want to know where HWA is, but it's also incredibly valuable to know where it isn't and where surveys have been done so we're not doubling up on one another. In terms of priority areas, this will be posted on our website. It really lines up with a lot of what Jason was talking about. Our known HWA is really points south of the Tongue Mountain Range. And then we're not quite sure on this blue line. I know Jason was talking about an observation right around here, but that leaves a lot of areas that there could be HWA. And that's where I think the priority survey areas really are for the Adirondacks this season. Our area is close to known infestation, right along that leading line. So we have an Adopt a Trail page on the Adirondack website, but in terms of where the highest priorities are, that's really the purpose of this slide here. You can access this from our website. I also like using the DEC interactive map to plan trips, where once you pick a trail, you can use the maps to plan your surveys. Aerial maps help really hone in on where your evergreen areas are. So I think between the resources that's on the APIP's website on 80K invasives, which is going to be this, and the Adopt a Trail map, you can actually go in here and adopt these individual trails. And then just general practice, the DEC maps are quite valuable too. So I apologize for the bit of a rush, but I want to get everybody out of here by 11:30. So that's my rundown. And I'm happy to answer any questions and really appreciate everyone's help with Forest Pest Hunters, always in the season.